And this like 20-year-old guy is like, Tinuviel, are you Luthien reborn? What smooth game? Hello, welcome to my channel, and welcome to Makeup and Middle-earth Monday, a show where I do a makeup look and talk about a topic I picked out from the Tolkien Legendarium. As you can see, I have a new setup. We'll see how it looks once I'm done recording, I guess, but I finally got like the lights put up and I got a chair, so I'm probably going to be recording from here now instead of in front of the screen that I've been using. Because I think this looks better personally, but yeah. Today's topic is Aragorn. He got the most votes in my most recent poll on Facebook. If you would like to contribute your opinion to the next video topic, please consider checking out my Facebook page. Link is in the description box below. It was pretty close, but yeah, Aragorn won, so I'm gonna do an episode on him. I'm probably going to do a little bit less about the Lord of the Rings trilogy and more about like what he did before and what he did after, and then we're kind of gonna like summarize the trilogy because if you're watching this show, I feel like you probably already have a decent handle on the Lord of the Rings, because otherwise why would you want to watch me talk about Tolkien for an hour? So that's my disclaimer for this. I'm probably going to be fucking with the camera angles here and there because I haven't recorded from this corner yet, and I want to make sure that it looks good. So today's makeup look is actually going to be my like very first Dungeons and Dragons character that I ever played as. I know the new movie is out now, I think. I haven't seen it yet, but like I want to, so this kind of inspired me to go back to my D&D roots. So this character is actually an Eladrin, and he's on the hunt to like kill every dragon that he can party up to kill, basically. So that's his character, but he has like a really bad sense of direction, so he gets lost like literally walking outside. So yeah, let's get started. So Aragorn is one of the primary characters in the Lord of the Rings trilogy, on being the titular character in The Return of the King. Also, fun fact, Professor Tolkien originally didn't like the idea of naming the third book Return of the King because he thought it gave the ending away, which, I mean, fair. Aragorn actually means revered king in Sindarin, and he has quite a respectable list of names and titles associated with him. So, Aragorn, and he's actually Aragorn II, and Aragorn is like his name as chieftain of the Dunedain, but he might potentially have been named after Aragorn I, who was the 5th chieftain of the Dunedain. So, one name. He was also known as Thorongil, which means Eagle of the Star, and that was a pseudonym that he used both in Gondor and in Rohan back pre Lord of the Rings. Elisar, which is Quenya for Elfstone, is Aragorn's name as king, so when he gets coronated, he is coronated Aragorn II, Elisar of House Telcontar, which I'll get to in a second. So, he was also known as Ethelan, which is the Sindarin equivalent of Elisar, and that was used in the King's Letter, I guess. He was also known as Elfstone, which is the common speak version of Elisar. He was known as Envinyatar, which is Quenya for the Renewer. He was known as Estel, which is Quenya for Hope. But, like, it more widely could mean hope, trust, temper of mind, steady, fixed in purpose, and difficult to dissuade. So I guess like what numerology, but for names, is that? I don't remember what it's called. I don't fucking care. He's also known as Strider, obviously, in the land around the Shire and Bree. He was known as Wingfoot, which was an honorary name that Éomer actually gave him when Aragorn told Éomer like how long it took him, Gimli, and Legolas to like book it of trying to get Merry and Pippin back from the Uruk-hai. Éomer was like, you went how far? And in this many days? Okay, I'm gonna... Wingfoot, yeah! And so that's where that came from. Like I said, Tel Kontar was his, like, the house that he established when he became king. And that's, Quenya for Strider, so... LOL. He was known as Isildur's heir. He was known as the Dunedain, Man of the West, and that's a name actually given to him by Bilbo Baggins when their friendship like evolved to the point where he was like allowed to give him nicknames, I guess. I'm not gonna be able to do the glue like I wanted to because this thing is not sticky at all. It's a bummer. Guess I'm just putting concealer over my eyebrows. This is gonna be like one of those baking shows where like, and then we made this, but I made it in advance so that we didn't have to wait for it to cook, which is what this is. And this looks like a grody piece of skin, which it's supposed to because it's a burn prosthetic. But I made this ahead of time because I do not have time or patience right now to wait for liquid latex to dry. But these things are really easy to make. Literally just liquid latex and toilet paper, and just tear the toilet paper into little pieces. If it's more than single ply, like separate it, like separate the ply, I guess, and then you like do a layer of liquid latex, you put some toilet paper on to give it some, like, you know, texture, and then you put another layer of liquid latex on, and then eventually you'll get, you know, whatever shape you wanted it to be in, and then you can peel it off, and as long as you're not really rough with it, you can reuse it. I would advise shaving your face first, though, because otherwise the liquid latex is gonna rip all the hair off your face. This is regardless of whether or not you are capable of growing a beard. I'm just... Full disclosure, you want to shave. It's great for exfoliating, though. But anyway, he was also called Longshanks, and this is like another Bree-ism, I guess, because the legs, quote, of the Bree men were shorter than his. And then Aracorno is another one, and this one, in my research, it was indicated that this is like a rare Quenya form of Aragorn, which only actually like appeared in like a discussion about Quenya words, so I'm a little unclear as to the canonicity of this one, but I figured I'd include it because it was on the list, so... In the book, Aragorn is described as being tall and lean, quote, with a shaggy head of dark hair flecked with gray, and a pale, stern face with keen gray eyes. And Tolkien noted that Aragorn was about 6'6", and he's often described as being rather grim, but with like unexpected moments of levity, so like, I guess... Aragorn's type of humor probably would be like gallows humor. Fun fact, and this is something that, like, you know how Tolkien fans are, me being one of them. Some people took issue with the fact that he had a beard in the movies because theoretically, Dunedain shouldn't really be able to grow like super impressive beards because if you remember, they're like descended from Númenóreans, and Númenóreans are all descended from elves and humans together because the first king of Numenor was Elros, who was Elrond's twin brother. So yeah, the prevailing opinion is that he shouldn't really be able to grow much of a beard, but this isn't really one of the Tolkien hills that I'm gonna die on. Like, yeah, I agree, but also I feel like in the same vein of why Círdan in his 0.5 second like cameo in Fellowship of the Ring doesn't have a beard is like, it's the same reason. It's because how would they explain that in a way that would not feel forced to people who haven't read the books, or who, you know, wouldn't really understand like why this dude has been out in the friggin' wilderness for like weeks and is completely clean shaven. I feel like I can kind of understand why that was a thing, but the more you know. It's gonna be fun getting all of this prostate off of my face, laying them a little bit, but I want the full effect, Also, some more fun trivia for you. In the early drafts of Lord of the Rings, when Professor Tolkien was like still formulating like the plot and the main characters, Aragorn's like first like iteration, I guess, his prototype was actually a hobbit ranger, and his nickname was Trotter because he wore wooden clogs. And obviously eventually that idea got scrapped. I think it's funny. Like, I'm glad it got scrapped because I don't know if I like Aragorn the way he is in the books, but it kind of tickles me a little bit that was at one point something that Professor Tolkien was doing. Now that this is in view of the camera, y'all are gonna watch this glass go all the way down here. Yeah, I just thought that was kind of funny. It's interesting to me because it kind of makes me think that was like a little bit of like the whimsy kind of that you find in The Hobbit kind of hanging on a little bit before he started to get a little bit more serious with the Lord of the Rings story. But, you know, now you can say, if you didn't already know that, you can now impress your friends with random Lord of the Rings trivia. I would say he's also, this episode isn't super structured, but like, it's Aragorn, like, I would say he's also a pretty different character in the books versus the movies, and like, I really like him in the movies and in the books. Like, he's my favorite character in the movies, but like, he is like, he's definitely a different character, because in the movies he's kind of like burdened by like the mistakes of his ancestor Isildur, and like the movies kind of go a little bit harder on the Isildur being corrupted by like his desire for the ring versus like, oh my god, please let me in. Whereas in the book, he kind of takes the ring as, I've talked about this in previous episodes, but he takes the ring as weregild for like the death of his father and brother during the war with Sauron. And yeah, like in the movies, they kind of play that differently. Why won't you open? While turning, push down. Yes, that's what I'm doing. Let me in. Yeah, so in the movies, he kind of broods over his own worthiness, and he's reluctant to, like, take his place as the rightful king at first, because he's, like, afraid that he's gonna make the same mistakes as Isildur, and so, like, a lot of his character arc is him kind of learning that he is worthy, and, you know, that he should be king, and, you know, having to come to terms with that. But in the book, he's already been, like, working towards, like, fulfilling his greater destiny as king and like uniting the two kingdoms of Arnor and Gondor, which I'm gonna go into. Like, I'm gonna go into that a little bit. Oh my god, I hate liquid latex. Like, I love it because it's damn useful, but I hate it because it does shit like this that I have to pull out of the bottle so that I can get into the stuff that hasn't solidified. Anyway, but yeah, so in the books, he's like aware of the greater destiny that he's been burdened with, and he's not shying away from it. And I'll go a little bit into the why of that as well, but we'll get there when we get there. And he was also considered like to be incredibly strong-willed, which is like that's one thing that comes into play when he gets his hands on the Palantir, because he was able to look at it and deal with the fact that Sauron was on the other end of it, which is not something that a lot of people were able to do. He was actually described as being the hardiest of living men in his lifetime, and he was also like described as being the most like his heroic ancestor Elendil of like any of his descendants. So that's pretty cool, because Elendil was like, you know, the superhero guy of their like family line. For better context about this man, I am gonna go into some background for him. I feel like I've talked enough about First and Second Age stuff that y'all hopefully have a decent amount of context to like the history of Aragorn's lineage, because his lineage is, you know, Numenor. But since this is a deep dive, I guess, does it count as a deep dive if I'm glossing over part of it? I don't know. I'm gonna go into Aragorn's background. It's the point of this tangent of me whining about having to talk about Numenor. So, if you watched the last episode about Beren and Luthien, you might remember me talking about their line of descendants continuing, like, until the end of the world, essentially. Aragorn is part of that line of descendants. But there's a really, really big chunk of time in between, like, when he came onto the scene and like when they were around, because they were from First Age. And I did the math, so you're welcome. Please thank me, because I fucking hate doing math, and anytime I can avoid doing it, I will avoid it. But for y'all, I did math. And so I can tell you, Aragorn was born almost 6,500 years after Beren and Luthien passed away. So they died in 503 of the First Age. Aragorn was born late into the Third Age, so 6,500 years between them, essentially. And that's the entire Second Age of Middle-earth, and the majority of the Third Age. The entire rise and fall of Numenor, and the fall of the line of kings that Aragorn is descended from, like, when, you know, before the stewards became a thing in Gondor, basically. If you're not accustomed to using liquid latex, I really, really, really recommend that you not use a brush you care about. See, I'm using Q-tip, because the minute that shit dries, that brush has got to go in the garbage, because there's nothing you can do about it. Anyway, I'm gonna stop noodling around with this and get on with the rest of the makeup. It looks weird now, but stick with me. So, that was the bottle. Oh my god, it pooted. Anyway, so for some context, if you don't know, or if it's been a minute since you read the Silmarillion, there's a great quote explaining that Aragorn is 39th in line, and this is a great quote because it told me this and I didn't have to do math. It is 39th in line of Isildur's heirs, and this is the same quote that says that he was the most like Elendil of all the heirs who came before him, basically. And Elendil was the leader of the Númenóreans, who remained faithful to Eru, the one god, and the Valar during... Hurry up and dry! During the fall of Númenor, when Sauron had like got his hooks into the current ruler Ar-Pharazôn and was like getting the bad Númenóreans into human sacrifice. Elendil was the leader of the Númenóreans who were not into that. They were not down for human sacrifice. So they are part of the royal line, but it's like they came from a branch family, if that makes sense. So Elendil's family was not part of the ruling family, but they were part of the royal line. because basically what had happened was they were descended from a princess of the royal line, Silmarion. She was the oldest daughter of the king, but she was passed over for her younger brother because at the time women weren't allowed to rule Numenor. Later on, that gets fixed because there are a couple Numenorian queens who were like the shit, but I'm not going to talk about them in this episode because it's not relevant. Anyway, Silmarion was the eldest daughter of the king, but women weren't allowed to rule, so she was passed over. The crown went to her younger brother. Silmarion ended up getting married and founding like the branch family, basically, that eventually came to be the leaders of the faithful that Elendil came from, which personally I think is kind of shitty, but I kind of think Tolkien meant for us to think it was shitty because it's her line of descendants that survived. The main royal line ended up falling into decadence, and that culminated in them like making human sacrifices to Morgoth, and then eventually they tried to invade the Undying Lands, and Eru turned the earth into a globe, and Numenor sank. At this point, Elendil and his sons Isildur and Anarion get out of Dodge before Numenor sank, but their ships got kind of like caught up in the crazy ocean behavior when Numenor did sink, so they got blown off course basically, and they got separated. So Elendil landed in this area on like northwestern part of Middle-earth, and he founded the kingdom of Arnor, and then his sons Anarion and Isildur ended up southeast on the map, I guess. I have to look at a map of Middle-earth, but they founded Gondor. Like, God, I'm overcomplicating it. But they founded Gondor. I don't think the movies do like a super great job of explaining that and like why the two kingdoms are a thing, and like as far as I recall, like I didn't really understand why Aragorn was like part of the Dunedain Rangers from the north, and yet his like kingdom was all the way in Gondor, and this is why. So if you wondered that also, now you know, because basically the royal line of kings of Gondor died out, and the kingdom of Arnor still has people living there, but the kingdom itself fell. And I didn't include this in my notes, so this is me purely going on memory, but I believe the Witch King of Angmar was responsible for both, because Angmar was at war with Arnor, and Arnor fell, but also the Witch King was over in like the area of Gondor later on. What's the name of what's the king's name? He didn't have any heirs and was basically like only interested in fisticuffs for whatever reason. Like he didn't want to get married, he was just interested in throwing hands. So the Witch King was basically like, hey, your mama is a bitch, come throw hands. And the king was like, alright, you best be ready to catch these hands. So he like rode out to Minas Morgul with like a couple dudes, and no one heard from them ever again. And that was what happened to the last king of Gondor, after which the stewards took over. Oh, also, Aragorn's battle cry is Elendil, Elendil, so he actually invokes his ancestor's name when he's charging into battle, which I think is neat. By the time Aragorn was actually born, the kingdom of Arnor had fallen, like it's been fallen for a while now, and the stewardship of Gondor has also been ruling for quite a long time by this point. So basically, Arnor had a king without a kingdom, and Gondor had a kingdom without a king, if that helps. But, I mean, it's an oversimplification, so it's what I have to offer you today. So, Aragorn's people, the Dunedain, were, like, basically the last left of the ruling line of Numenor. The Shire actually has the Dunedain Rangers to thank for having such peaceful, quiet lives, because the Dunedain basically kept like the orcs and like dark creatures, etc., from coming too far south, which is something that Aragorn actually mentions in the book, where he's like, you guys get to live your quiet, peaceful lives while we die, like, protecting you, and you don't even know about it, and these people here call me Strider, and they think I'm just a vagabond, so he's got some opinions about that, which, I mean, you know, fair. Aragorn's parents were Arathorn II, and he was the 15th chieftain of the Dunedain, and then his wife Gilrain. Gilrain's father actually originally opposed the marriage because Arathorn was, like, significantly older than Gilrain, and she was considered to be quite young as far as, like, marrying age is. I think she was in her 20s when they got married, and Arathorn was, like, in his 60s, so if I remember right. So yeah, there's a bit of an age gap there, and, you know, keep in mind, Dunedain live a very long time. Like, they live a long time. Not as long as elves, but, you know, they live longer than, like, middlemen, I guess I would say. Non-Dunedain dudes. Non-Duna dudes? Dunedain? Okay, I'll stop. I'm sorry. But yeah, so he opposed the marriage because Arathorn was significantly older than his daughter, but also because he, like, there was, like, some kind of prophetic thing, basically, that, like, they all kind of knew that Arathorn was not gonna live much longer, but Gilrain's mother actually had a prophetic gift. Her name was Evorwen, and she, quote, saw that hope would be born from the union. Like I said, Aragorn at one point was called Estel, which hope that was born from this union. Evorwen actually said, "Wed now, hope may be born for our people, but if they delay, it will not come while this age lasts." And then Aragorn was born in Third Age 2931. So he was pretty key in the whole ring business. I don't even want to think about how the quest would have gone if Aragorn hadn't been born. Good lord. It wouldn't have gone very far, would it? I think Aragorn was around 2, actually, when his father Arathorn was killed, and Arathorn was actually shot through the eye with an orc arrow while he was out hunting orcs with Elrond's sons, Eladan and Elrohir. After that, Gilrain left where they were living, and she actually took Aragorn with her to live in Rivendell, because Rivendell was where Elrond had been fostering all of Isildur's heirs for, like, centuries by this point. So Aragorn grew up in Rivendell. His mother, like, she wanted to hide his identity because she was concerned if Sauron found out his true lineage, then he would be in danger. So when he was living in Rivendell, that's when they started calling him Estel. He grew up becoming, like, pretty close friends with Elrond's sons, Eladan and Elrohir. He wasn't actually told about his lineage until he turned 20. And at that point, it was when Elrond, like, told him what was up and gave him the broken shards of Narsil, which was, you know, the sword that cut the Ring of Power off of Sauron's fingy. When he gave him the sword, Elrond also gave Aragorn the Ring of Barahir, which you may remember me mentioning a few times. And there was another heirloom called the Scepter of Annúminas. That one signified the kingdom of Arnor, but Elrond did not give him that yet, and basically was like, this will be yours eventually, but you have to earn it. It was basically the message. It was during this same time, I think it was like the next day actually, that Aragorn first met Elrond's daughter Arwen. And up until this point, she had been living in Lothlorien with her grandparents, Galadriel and Celeborn. But she was back in Rivendell at this point, and this is when she and Aragorn first meet, and I think it's really cute because he was basically, like, chilling, and he sees her kind of, like, pass by, and he doesn't know her name, but, like, literally he's here, like, making some tunes, to the story of Beren and Luthien, and then he sees her and he thinks that she's Luthien and that Luthien is just like stepped out into the world, and so he doesn't know her name, but he calls out to her and calls her Tinuviel, which is the same thing that Beren did when he saw Luthien, because he didn't know her name, so he called out to her, called her Tinuviel, which means, it's a poetic term that means nightingale in Sindarin. They meet, and it's love at first sight for him. Like, he absolutely is in love with her. We all love an older woman because, you know, she's like over 2,000 years old. Can you imagine being an elf princess who is like extremely wise and seasoned, and you've been around for, you know, hundreds of years, and this like 20-year-old guy is like, Tinuviel, are you Luthien reborn? What smooth game? Like, what game? Like, Aragorn got game. Anyway, pretty close on the heels after that, like after he's made aware of his lineage and everything. He leaves to take over his position as chieftain of the Dunedain. Doesn't see Arwen again for a while, but in 2956, he meets Gandalf for the first time. And they pretty much hit it off immediately. Gandalf gives him some good advice, and I mean, you know, I feel like Gandalf's advice is always good, but like some people don't follow it, but I mean, when has he given bad advice? Don't talk to me about the Mines of Moria. Through this interaction and through this friendship, Aragorn actually becomes intrigued by the Shire and the areas around that. He starts, like, you know, exploring around there, doing his ranger job. It's during this process that he becomes known as Strider in that region. He also, kind of jumping around a little bit. I don't know, jumping around. This is all, you know, like all of our pre-Lord of the Rings info. He went on a few campaigns, like military campaigns, before like the Lord of the Rings, when he was a young man. So between the years of 2957 to like 2980, he's kind of all around, all over the place doing stuff. He worked to help allies against like the growing threat of like Sauron, because this is around the time when Sauron is kind of starting to ramp up his stuff, his bullshit, if you will. So during this time, Aragorn helped several different like allies against this, and this is when he was known as Thorongil, which I mentioned means Eagle of the Star, and it was, I believe, because he was wearing I think he had a brooch on, if I'm remembering right. This brooch was called the Star of Elendil, I think. Originally there was like an actual brooch that Elendil had, but it was lost when Isildur was killed, so they made a replica of it. And I'm pretty sure it's the replica of that Aragorn was wearing. So like, they called him the Eagle because he was like super fast on his feet, and he had like super sharp vision, you know, being descended from Numenor. And they were like the most elf-like of all men. They called him Thorongil, and he served under King Thengol of Rohan, and not to be confused with King Thingol. Thengol was King Theoden's father. Aragorn served under him for a while, and then he went on to Gondor, and he served under Ecthelion II, who was the steward of Gondor at the time, and he was actually the father of LOTR's Worst Parent Award recipient, Denethor. And Denethor did not like Aragorn. He saw him as competition, which, I mean, yeah, I guess. During his service under Ecthelion II, Aragorn led an assault against the Corsairs of Umbar. It was like a night assault, and he burned like a bunch of their ships, and he also personally slew this guy called the Captain of the Haven. This was a really good military victory for Gondor, because the Corsairs of Umbar were gonna ally with Sauron, and that's not what we want to happen. So he kind of really crippled them for the mo. After that, he supposedly like would have had like some really great honors for that because it was a really decisive military victory. He actually ended up like he didn't go back after that. Like he left the dudes that he was raiding the haven with, I guess. He sent Ecthelion a farewell message, and then he traveled to lands east and south. I wasn't able to find a whole lot of info for like where exactly he went and what exactly he was doing, but what I could find essentially was like he learned a lot about the men in those regions, which also included allies of Sauron, and whatever knowledge that he gained from that turned out to be like really helpful in helping like the West survive the War of the Ring later in the Third Age. But that was kind of the extent of what I was able to find with my research. He traveled extensively during that time period. He actually at one point even went through Moria. Later on, when the Fellowship is thinking about going through Moria, Aragorn was literally like, let's not. It's a bad idea. I don't want to go back. I would not be eager to return. So, we all know how that turned out, though. They end up going, but he apparently traveled through Moria at some point earlier on. So, in 2980, like I said, at the end of this adventurous period, he finally travels back to Rivendell. He begins the journey back to Rivendell, I guess I should specify, and he's 49 now, so it's been a minute. He stops in Lothlorien on the way back, and he meets Arwen there again. And they end up spending an entire season together in Lothlorien, and come midsummer, they decide that they want to get hitched. So they go up onto this hill called Cairn Amroth, which I've mentioned in previous episodes, but it's basically this hill covered in flowers. And that's where they actually pledge to marry each other. It's at this point, Aragorn gives her the Ring of Barahir as like an engagement ring. This basically means that Arwen has renounced her elvish heritage and accepted the fate of men, which is to die and never return to Earth because of her love for Aragorn. So when Aragorn returns to Rivendell, he talks to Elrond about it, and Elrond is, understandably not thrilled, probably. But he doesn't, oppose the marriage, but he's basically like, I'm not gonna give you my blessing yet, but I will when you become king, and then you can marry my daughter. Because my daughter is, the most precious person in our entire family, and she's not gonna get married to some bum, basically. And this is actually one of quite a few very significant parallels between Arwen and Aragorn's relationship and Beren and Lúthien's relationship, because Beren and Lúthien also faced some challenges from Lúthien's dad, King Thingol. I reckon Elrond was less of a dick about it, though. So, in the following years, Aragorn did more traveling. Eventually, he actually went through Harad at some point and said, the stars were strange there. Text doesn't really go into, a whole lot of information about what he did there, or about Harad in general. But we know he went there. And in 3001 of the Third Age, Gandalf actually made contact with him again. And this was kind of prompted by his need to find Gollum. Basically, this hobbit named Bilbo Baggins found this funny magic ring, and Gandalf thought it was kind of sus. And he figured out that Bilbo got the ring from this weird little dude named Gollum, and he enlisted Aragorn's help to basically track Gollum down. And it took a while for them to find him, a while, because Gollum ended up getting captured by Sauron before Aragorn or Gandalf could get to him. I forgot to get a cup of water, so... Gollum was captured by Sauron before they could get him, and I think they kept him imprisoned for 8 years, or some ridiculous amount of time to keep this little dude captive. Again, it's Gollum, but damn, that sucks. In 3007, and this is while Gollum is still captive in Sauron's torture dungeon, Aragorn's mother passes away in 3007. He visited her one final time before she passed away. She's actually noted for being rather young for a Dunedain when she died. She was like only 100, and to give you context, Aragorn is like 87 during the bulk of the Lord of the Rings trilogy, and he was considered to be nearing his prime at that point. So she was rather young. It's fairly easy to infer that she just kind of lost her will to live. Her last words to him were Oneni estel edain, ucheben estel anim, which means I gave hope, which is a reference to Aragorn's name Estel, to the Dunedain. I have kept no hope for myself. So I think she really kind of just lost the will to live. It was difficult for her to imagine a world where her son would actually survive long enough to become king. She's a very tragic character. It's sad, but there's a lot of sad shit in Tolkien, so we move on. Gollum makes it out, or he gets set loose. Who knows? Who fucking cares? He gets out, and Aragorn finally tracks him down in 3017. So it took him 16 years to get a hold of Gollum after Gandalf was like, hey, maybe we should be looking for this Gollum dude. So I don't think, I mean, obviously, that's not a reflection of Aragorn's tracking ability. That's a reflection of the fact that Gollum was like in prison for 8 years, and that he's a sneaky little shit. So Aragorn finally tracks Gollum down, and he snatches him in the Dead Marshes. So I'm assuming this is like pretty hot on the heels of Sauron finally releasing him. Aragorn got him, and then he took him to Mirkwood. Thranduil allowed him to basically leave Gollum there in his little prison area. So Aragorn does that, and then at some point Gandalf is able to interrogate Gollum while he's there, but Gollum does eventually escape because he's a sneaky little shit, you know, slippery little fucker. After depositing Gollum in Mirkwood, Aragorn went west again, and I'm assuming this was like before Gandalf actually got to speak to Gollum, because he runs into Gandalf, and this is actually when Gandalf tells Aragorn about Frodo and Frodo's plan to leave the Shire in like the upcoming fall. There's an entire tangent that I could go on about how fucking lucky Frodo was that he didn't get got, because he got out of town so much later than was like safe for him to do. It's another time. I don't need to talk about that now. Gandalf tells him about that, and Aragorn is like, well, I guess I should probably head in that direction since this is kind of important. So he does. And he runs into this group of elves led by this dude named Gildor and Glorian. And this group of elves actually had crossed paths with Frodo and friends on the road. And in the book, Gildor and these elves let the hobbits chill with them for a while, and they kind of travel a little ways together, and it's a little bit safer. This is when like the Black Riders are very much trying to find Frodo. Aragorn keeps an eye out for Frodo and friends, and he ends up traveling to Bree and finally crosses paths with them, and the hobbits think he's super sus, which is not really helped by the proprietor of the Prancing Pony, Barlaam Butterbur, who thinks Strider is basically just like a shady vagabond, and he's like, why would you want to talk to that guy? You don't know what he wants. And when Frodo actually talks to Aragorn is like, well, this fat man in Bree knows me as Strider and doesn't have any clue what me and my people do to keep y'all safe, is basically like... It's been like a year since I've read the book, but like when I remember right, that was kind of the gist of it, and I was just like, damn, Aragorn's kind of a savage. You know, after Frodo's little accidental vanishing act in the bar, Strider grabs him, and they end up deciding to go with him after Gandalf like left the hobbits this letter with Barlaam, and he fucking like forgot to give it to them because he's terrible at remembering shit. But the letter was basically Gandalf being like, yes, if you meet my friend Aragorn on the road, You should travel with him because I sent him to find you and he's trustworthy. I think Gandalf also mentioned the Brelanders call him Strider. Basically, they decide to trust him after they read the letter from Gandalf, and Gandalf tells them that he's chill. Aragorn leads the hobbits through the Midgewater marshes. As they're traveling through, they actually catch a glimpse of, like, the battle that Gandalf has with the Nazgul on Weathertop. And they see it, like, from a distance. But this is, like, a little after the point where Gandalf has been missing, because that's why they ended up, you know, they couldn't stay in Bree, because they were supposed to meet Gandalf there, but he was, detained, we should say, by Saruman, which I would very much hope that we already know. But if we don't already know that, hi, welcome to the Lord of the Rings fandom. So, da-da-da-da-da, Frodo gets stabbed on Weathertop. They still have like 2 weeks to travel on foot to get to Rivendell without getting snatched by the Black Riders. I guess a tangent real quick, but can we just appreciate like what a tough little fucker Frodo is in the book? Because he goes 14 days after getting stabbed by the Nazgul, and he's able to ride and like keep his seat on a horse. Like, I know in the movie it's Arwen that comes to rescue them, which like, that's a whole other topic. Actually, you know what? This is the Aragorn episode. I don't know if I'm going to ever have an Arwen episode. I might as well talk about it now. Yeah, so in the movie, they decided to make it Arwen who comes to, like, their rescue. And, like, personally, I don't have a problem with it because I like Arwen. I think Liv Tyler is great. And, like, I think it was a wise choice because, like, they really, like, they needed to give her a little bit more. They needed to give her a little bit more, because in the book, she's just kind of mentioned, and they talk about, like, their backstory, I guess, but, like, the backstory that she's part of is really more into the appendices, if I remember right. Like, she doesn't do much in the actual book, so, like, I don't have a problem that they expanded her role a little bit, but it would have been really cool to see Glorfindel, because Glorfindel is like a fucking boss. Because in the book, if you're not aware, this dude named Glorfindel is the one that finds them in the woods, and he gives Frodo his elf horse to take to Rivendell. And Glorfindel is an elf that, depending on the version you read, but the version that I have decided that I like as canon, he was actually present during the fall of Gondolin. He's one of like the few dudes who has killed a Balrog. So he killed a Balrog during the fall of Gondolin, and he died like in the process of that. But because he was such a like super awesome, fantastic guy, the Valar let him reincarnate. So he's been chilling in Rivendell, and he went out to help the hobbits, and he gave Frodo his horse, and Frodo rode his horse like across the fords of Bruinen and everything. So in the book, Frodo actually rode the horse by himself, which I think is kind of cool. They kind of shafted him in the movie a little bit. Shafted. I would really love to see a version of the Lord of the Rings where we get to see Frodo be the little badass that he is in the book. Anyway, though, they get to Rivendell, during which time Aragorn essentially, like, he gets information from Elladan and Elrohir, because, you know, they're bros. This is all in the time frame before the Council of Elrond happened. Frodo is getting healed from his stab wound, and everybody's kind of chilling. So Aragorn is, like, getting information from Elladan and Elrohir, his bros, and he also was like hanging out with Bilbo, because he and Bilbo are friends, and he and Bilbo are chilling, like writing music together, because that's just what they like to do, like to chill and write music, which I think is super cute. There's a poem that Bilbo has written that I'm gonna read here in a second once I get all this powder out of my eyes. You may find it familiar. The poem is: all that is gold does not glitter, not all those who wander are lost. The old that is strong does not wither, deep roots are not reached by the frost. From the ashes of fire shall be woken, a light from the shadows shall spring. Renewed shall be blade that was broken, the crownless again shall be king. It's in the movie, I think Arwen is the one who reads the poem, but Bilbo actually wrote that poem, so he wrote it about Aragorn, which I think is kind of cool. Anyway, after the Council of Elrond, in preparation for their journey, you know, to destroy the ring. The shards of Narsil are actually reforged while they're in Rivendell. I know in the movie they do it later for like dramatic effect, I guess, but in the book they reforge the sword while they're in Rivendell. I believe Aragorn is the one that names it Andúril. It was described as shining both red and white with the light of both the sun and the moon. The blade was engraved with, quote, a device of 7 stars set between the crescent moon and the rayed sun, and about them was written many runes. Like Sting, Andúril was actually supposed to glow, and so was Gandalf's sword Glamdring, but we sadly don't see that in the films. But Narsil is Quenya, and it roughly like translates to red and white flame. Andúril is also Quenya, and it translates to flame of the west. The filmmakers had the prop for the movies etched with a Quenya phrase, and let me see if I can read it. Anar nanye Andúril ine Narsil imakil elendilo, Lerkuvanten I moli mordoreo isil. I think. Do I need glasses? I'm pretty sure that is. It basically means in Quenya, son, I am Andúril, who was once Narsil, sword of Elendil. The slaves of Mordor shall flee from me, moon. And then it has another inscription on the hilt that is Narsil Esenya Makil Meletia Telkar Carneron Navarotese, which is Quenya for Narsil is my name, a mighty sword. Telkar made me in Nogrod, which was when the original sword was forged, I guess. But initially Aragorn intended to travel with the Fellowship until he parted ways with them. He was originally planning on going back to Gondor with Boromir, but obviously that did not work out. When they realized the Crebain were spying for Saruman, Aragorn was the one who suggested Caradhras, but they were unable to pass because of, you know, the storm that was conjured there. And then, I know in the movie it's a cave troll, but in the book, during the battle of the Chamber of Mazarbul, Aragorn is the one who, he kills the orc chieftain. So in the book it's an orc rather than a cave troll, but you know, cave troll, I guess that's more action-packed. Obviously we know Gandalf fell fighting the Balrog pretty soon after that, so rip. When they reached Lothlorien, they stayed there as Galadriel and Celeborn's guests for like a decent chunk of time, which I've covered in other episodes as well. When they were leaving, she gifted him with this brooch called the Elfstone that I believe Gandalf actually brought back with him from the Undying Lands when he came to Middle-earth the first time, like as Gandalf the Grey. He entrusted it to Galadriel with the stipulation that eventually like one would come bearing the name of the brooch and that it would be his destiny to unite the 2 kingdoms, etc. It was a silver brooch shaped like a bird with like a green gem set in it. There's actually like it's like an elvish tradition basically where like family of the bride or the mother of the bride gives the groom a jewel, and since Arwen's mother isn't in the picture anymore, Galadriel is the one who does that. So she gives him the Elfstone, and she also gives him a sheath for Andúril, which is super nice. And then they use the boats to travel, and they eventually pass through the Argonath. And a fun fact, these giant statues, he mentions they're like his kin. They're actually supposed to be Isildur and Anarion. The Fellowship ends up camping at this place called Parthgalen, and they try to decide what they want to do now that Gandalf isn't with them anymore. Aragorn still wants to go to Gondor, but he also feels like it's his duty to, you know, protect Frodo and ensure that, like, the ring bearer remains safe. But it's around this point that Boromir gets, like, corrupted by the ring, and he tries to take it from Frodo, which drives Frodo away, so Frodo leaves without telling anybody, but Sam is woke to his game, so he chases after him, and they leave together. And the remaining Fellowship are attacked by Saruman's Uruk-hai. Boromir is killed trying to protect Merry and Pippin, and then Merry and Pippin are taken captive. Aragorn is actually there for Boromir's last moments, and he privately confesses to Aragorn that he tried to take the ring from Frodo, and he regrets that. Legolas, Gimli, and Aragorn like have a funeral for him, and they put him in a boat, and they put like a bunch of orc swords and shit in the boat with him. Like, all of the enemies that he killed, they put their weapons in the boat with him, and they send him off with a lament. And I'm not going to read the lament because it's really long, but Aragorn wrote it in like 10 minutes. He and Legolas sang it, and it's like it's good. It's good. Like, especially the fact that this dude supposedly wrote it in like 10 minutes. It's good. So the three of them leave, and they go to pursue Merry and Pippin. They end up in Rohan. They run into Éomer, blah blah blah, you know, Wingfoot. He gives them some horses on the promise that Aragorn will return to Edoras before long, and so they continue onward. They end up tracking the hobbits to Fangorn, where they find Gandalf the White again. And at this point, Gandalf actually passes along a couple messages from Galadriel to each of them, and the one that he passes on to Aragorn is, "Where now are the Dunedain, Elisar, Elisar? Why do thy kinsfolk wander afar? Near is the hour when the lost should come forth, and the grey company ride from the north. But dark is the path appointed to thee. The dead watch the road that leads to the sea." And this is a reference to the paths of the dead that he's gonna go on later. But each of these was prophetic, you know, and it talks to each of them. They liberate Theoden from Saruman's influence. Aragorn fights alongside the Rohirrim at Helm's Deep. Also, fun fact, in earlier versions of the story, Éowyn, we know Éowyn has feelings for Aragorn, and he doesn't reciprocate them. But in an earlier version, they weren't one-sided. Arwen actually got added in, like, fairly late, I think, into the writing process. After the Battle of Helm's Deep, they go to Isengard, and they get the Palantir after he looks it out a window and trying to like hit Gandalf with it, and he misses. So they get the Palantir. It's around this point where Aragorn uses the Palantir to get Sauron's attention, basically, because he wants to draw Sauron's eye away from where Sam and Frodo are probably going to be. That actually prompts Sauron, like, to launch a premature attack against Minas Tirith, like, as a result. So he attacks Minas Tirith sooner than he planned on. So he wasn't, like, totally ready, but, like, this also means that they had to haul ass to try to get to Minas Tirith in order to, like, save them. The Rohirrim actually end up making a deal with the Druedain, who are, like, kind of like the wild men who live in Rohan, and the Druedain, like, show them, like, a really rad shortcut to get to Minas Tirith, but basically they're like, "We'll show you this, but the cost of this is that you leave us alone and never come in our woods again." And King Theoden is like, "Alright, bet, let's go." Aragorn separates from the Rohirrim because he has to go through the paths of the dead. So he, Gimli, and Legolas go. They're actually joined by Elrond's sons, Elladan and Elrohir, as well as a group of Dunedain called the Grey Company, and they are all of Aragorn's kinsmen, basically, and all of them are Aragorn's kinsmen, and they're led by this dude named Halbarad. And Halbarad, he also brought a standard with him to give to Aragorn that was actually sewn by Arwen herself. It was a black and white standard with the white tree of Gondor embroidered on it, along with the crown and 7 stars, which represented his ancestor Elendil. So they raise this army of the dead, and they use it to defeat the Corsairs of Umbar again. And then they take the Corsair ships. They use the army of the dead to get the Corsair ships, and then he releases them, I believe. He doesn't have them to actually save the city. They do that on their own. They go and collect a good chunk of soldiers from, like, the southern area of Gondor to go help, and so that's how they help save Minas Tirith from getting, conquered. After the Battle of the Pelennor Fields, there's, like, quite a few people that need help, that need healing, and Aragorn goes to the Houses of Healing to heal Éowyn and to heal Faramir, and he also nurses Merry back to health. Éowyn and Faramir especially needed some help because they had both been affected by this thing called the Black Breath, which is a Nazgul thing where, like, if you get super close to them, it's like an evil aura, basically, that they can use to make their enemies, like, sick and weak, and eventually, like, it can lead to unconsciousness, and if it's super severe and it goes untreated, it can be fatal. So he was able to heal them from that so that it wasn't fatal, which is part of this, like, long-standing, like, belief and hope in, like, the people of Gondor that, like, their king will return one day, and, like, the prophecy line, this old lady works in the Houses of Healing, and she's like, the hands of the king are the hands of a healer, and so shall the rightful king be known. And she's, like, super duper stoked. I forget her name. I think it's Yorvith? I don't know. This old lady who works in the Houses of Healing, and she's, like, super stoked that Aragorn is there. So he heals them. The people become, like, really interested in him, like, rather quickly as a result of this. But he actually doesn't stick around in Gondor for too long because he doesn't want to cause, like, a conflict while they're still dealing with Sauron about, like, his legitimacy, essentially. So he goes to Minas Morgul, and he takes the, quote, Army of the West with him. And it's in an attempt to, like, basically, like, engage Sauron's forces and keep his eye on them, because they know that Frodo and Sam, once again, like, Frodo and Sam are trying to get to Mount Doom to destroy the ring. So they actually burn the fields at Minas Morgul as part of that plan, and then they march to the Black Gate. And around this point, there are, like, some men among them, a lot of, like, the lesser experienced men, kind of, were just terrified. They were too terrified to continue forward, so Aragorn was like, okay, you don't have to come, but I need you to go and retake this island called Caer Andros, which was a strategic point in, like, the River Anduin, and it was important for part of, like, defending the River Junction in Gondor. So they went and they went and retook that. Like, they actually retook it. They went and did that while he took, like, the rest of the army to the Black Gates and challenged Sauron's army to come catch these hands, bruv. We know how that went. The ring eventually was destroyed, and Sauron was laid low and will never gain power ever again. Hooray. After the ring was destroyed, Aragorn led the effort to, like, clear the rest of the orcs out of Mordor, and we can probably appreciate full circle we've come, because Aragorn is descended from the royal line of Numenor, which Sauron originally had a vendetta against, to the point where Sauron could claim credit for Numenor's destruction, but he wasn't ever able to actually wipe out the royal line, and that royal line was instrumental in defeating Sauron for good. So, get fucked. Aragorn is then crowned King Elisar Telcontar, Aragorn II Elisar Telcontar. Like I said, Telcontar is the Quenya transliteration of Strider. And so he like founded his house, and he named his house Telcontar Strider, which I think is so fucking funny. It's just him being like, see what we did there? At his coronation is when Elrond finally actually passes the Scepter of Numenor to him, since he finally earned it. And Aragorn then became the 26th King of Arnor, the 35th King of Gondor, and the first king to unite both kingdoms, I believe. So, at Aragorn's coronation as Elisar, he actually recites this thing called the Oath of Elendil, and it's a verse in Quenya, and it's actually something that Elendil said when he first landed and founded the King of Arnor. In the movie, it's this really beautiful scene where they have Viggo sing the poem, but it is Et earelo endorena utulian sinume maruvan ar hildinyar ten Ambar Meta, which translates to, out of the great sea to Middle Earth I am come. In this place I will abide, and my heirs unto the ending of the world. He does. I mean, he's part of that line, and his heirs do endure until the end of the world. Aragorn was married to Arwen shortly thereafter at Midsummer. Like when they plunged to marry each other in Midsummer. They were married at Midsummer in 3019. He ruled Gondor until year 120 of the Fourth Age, and his reign was marked with peace and prosperity, and by a renewed effort among men, elves, and dwarves to work together in friendship. He also led several campaigns to like reclaim parts of the kingdoms that had fallen to the Easterlings and the Haradrim, and he actually reestablished, I think, all of Gondor's ancient borders that had been like lost over the centuries. He also officially recognized Faramir as his steward, and he gave Faramir the title of Prince of Ithilien, and he actually gave him custody of the lands of Ithilien, and like had him help like reclaim the area from like the darkness of Mordor that had spread there. I mean, he also declared that Minas Morgul should just be fucking like, just tear it down, man. Just fucking tear it down. It needs to be destroyed. There's nothing good there. All the evil sorcery has just corrupted it so much that by the time it would be uncorrupted enough for like men to live there, it would have been like centuries. So he was like, yeah, just nuke it. After taking his place as king, he also reestablished Orthanc, and it had been, you know, cleaned of like Sauron's shit. And he had the Palantir that they had taken from there restored in its place. And after they like recaptured Orthanc and like reestablished it, I guess, they actually found the original star of Elendil, aka the Elendil Mirror, and this was a star-shaped gem set in Mithril, and Saruman had actually taken it off of Isildur's body, like when he found Isildur's body, like when he was, you know, looking for the One Ring a while ago. Aragorn already had possession of the replica, obviously. He kept both gems, and he would wear the original, like, on special occasions, basically. It was, you know, super valuable historical artifact, so he didn't want to, like, mess it up, so he would wear it for special occasions. During his reign, he also established this area known as the Forest of the Druidine as the protected area for the Druidine, and the Druidine were those dudes who, the wild dudes who, like, helped them get to Gondor super fast. So, he held up his end of the bargain with that. And he also declared the Shire as a protected area that men were not allowed to enter, basically like without permission of the hobbits. He also granted the West March as part of the territory belonging to the hobbits, and then he officially recognized like the Thane of the Shire, and also like recognized the settlement of Buckland. So his reign was really prosperous. He was just a great king. I don't know that we should be surprised by this news, but there you go. In 120 is when he passed away. So Aragorn, basically, like, he knew that his time was coming soon for him to pass away, and he passed the kingship onto his son, Eldarion, and then went to the House of Kings, and he laid down on, like, the bier that was meant for him, and Arwen basically, like, stayed with him until he passed away, and he, like, passed away, quote, quote, with, like, great dignity, and he died at the ripe old age of 210 after ruling for 122 years. Like I said, they live a long time. So, after he passed away, Arwen left Gondor, and she went back to Lothlorien. By this point, Lothlorien had basically been completely abandoned, so there was no one there. And she went to Cairn Amroth, where they had first, like, pledged to marry each other, and she laid down there and basically died of a broken heart, joining him in wherever it is that men go when they die. Also, I guess another trivia, the graves of Merry and Pippin are also beside his, so I don't know if y'all find that depressing. Tolkien really does do the thing thoroughly when it comes to, like, how his characters live out the rest of their lives and pass away. I thought it was interesting trivia, but, you know, I'm me, so I think it's all interesting. When I styled this wig originally, I had such issues with it because it looks like Ariel, but I put the ears on and it was less so. So I know it looks like Ariel. I don't want to hear it. I know. I don't want to hear it from any of y'all, because I know that I'm just so pretty. In a perfect world, these would not have black on them, but I'll touch them up after I'm done with the look that they have to be black for, so. But yeah, see, like it? Let me put the other ear on. The idea basically being that we have long hair here to hide our gnarly scar. My first D&D character. So yeah, that's what I've got for you for Aragorn today. Did you learn anything new? Did I not mention something that you think I should have? Feel free to let me know in the comments, as long as you don't let me know that this wig looks like Ariel. Because I already know that. This is an Autumn Eladrin. I also kind of wanted to use this wig for a Maedhros cosplay, but nobody wants to cosplay the Silmarillion with me, so I don't know if that's ever actually going to happen. But now that we've reached the end, it's time for a little segment that I like to call Metal Music Monday. This is where I recommend a song from my metal library. Maybe we like the same music, maybe it's new to you. Either way, I hope you enjoy it. The song of the week is Straight to the Heart by Battle Beast, and I really fucking love this band. I hadn't heard them before, but they were the opening act for Camelot when I went to see them a few years ago, and I really liked them. I really liked them. So I have definitely added them to, the list of bands that I enjoy, and I hope you enjoy them too. That's it. I hope you've enjoyed our time together. I know that I really have, but even if you didn't, I appreciate you giving me the chance. If you did enjoy, I would really appreciate it if you left me a like, or if you wanted to subscribe, if you want to leave me a comment, or, if you want to share my video, that would be, super cool. But until next time, Namarie.